more minute, but you should definitely talk.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff already mentioned that the filmmaking process is a complicated thing, and Maurice Schechter will take us and introduce the details of the filmmaking process first as an overview of different pathways that you can take, and then he's also going to talk about a case study that he has worked on recently with a contemporary artist. Maurice Schechter is the head of the Media Lab and the chief engineer of Duart Film and Video in New York City. Duart was founded in 1922 and is the oldest independent film post-production company in the States. The Media Lab originally was set up for preservation of obsolete videotape formats. Since then, it has expanded to reference test material prototype production, exhibition consulting, and equipment servicing. In 2010, Duart shut down its film processing, and I was actually the last client of the film department with Tacita Dean's work. Merce Cunningham performs Stillness. And I was anxious to get the prints before they closed down the department. It was a very sad moment. Mr. Schechter has since worked with many artists and museums to support the growth of film and video-based art with the help of many partners. Please, Maurice, come up to the stage.
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, working for a film lab is a very interesting. Actually, I should be. Yes, working for a film lab is a very interesting experience. In fact, in the heyday of Duart, when they had almost 150 employees, and they used to hand out a shirt like this, and maybe it was self-promoting there, but they shoot film. And as Irwin Young, the owner of Duart, he always tells me, you're kind of nuts to be in the film lab business. It's a very difficult business. So when we decided we want to continue working in the medium and film for the art community, we had to actually come up with some strategies. And I am kind of happy to say, film is actually not dead. It is changing. It used to be you would go to some place like Duart or Technicolor or Deluxe, and you would do a one-stop shopping for film. Everything would be done in-house. Well, that's not the case anymore. But you can still buy film stock, negative and positive. You can still have it processed. You can still have it recorded, printed, and edited. You can still find projectors and support for them. And the artists still love the medium. And we're going to kind of go into that a little bit more deeper. So you have actually a copy of this chart in your handouts, and Jeff sort of gave some of the groundwork for some of the workflows and mediums, and I'm going to take it a little bit further. And one thing about workflows and processes is that this is, in essence, trying to cover the workflow as it is today, not necessarily how it was done 30, 40 years ago, and also it's not going to cover every instance of workflow because sometimes it's very case-specific and project-specific. And so we're basically going to, kind of cover the outline of it here. Just to highlight some of the points of the chart first, you'll see actually two sets of lines here. One's a gray line, one's an orange line. Those relate to two different mediums. So this is in essence the picture information here, the sound information here, and when it's dotted or dashed, that's relating to it being a digital form. So this is in essence an analog form, it's solid, it's a digital form here. We're going to, part of the case study that I'm going to talk about a little later on, that I'm going to be covering the digital intermediate aspect of filmmaking, which winds up as 60 millimeter print from an artist that's here today. And Janice Allen actually will be covering the purely analog aspect of making different work, which no digital intermediate process whatsoever. So again, that's what we're going to be, she's going to be covering the analog aspect. So that's why we talk, so Jeff actually kind of highlighted a lot of the aspects of analog. You can, when you acquire from an analog source, when you're saying acquiring, that could either be a negative, that could be a positive, which is be reversal film, or it could be a print. And actually, the print is actually what's going to be talked about in Janice Allen's talk. It was print original. Recording the sound from the acquisition can be, say, from the print itself, which is an optical track, which is the piece talking about later. Or it could be separately recorded, an opera field recorder, audio, separate audio recording. Now, traditionally today, when you work with film, you're shooting on film, you would have it developed, and then you have it transferred on a scanner and telecine to, in essence, a low-resolution file. DV resolution, something very easy to work with on a laptop. That information is, so it's transferred to video, low resolution, and it's ingested into an editing system. And that can be, most popular today is either Apple Final Cut Pro or Avid Media Composer, common software. Film is ingested into the editing system, and there the editor, the artist, they work together to basically cut the film digitally. They'll do all the cuts. They'll preview the shots. They will look at the image as it's as a pre-thought of how it's going to be projected. So once they finish the editorial on the computer, a list will be generated from the computer, which is called a cut list. Sometimes called an EDL. It has a couple different names. It's basically it's a text and number based list to give to the negative cutter to exactly where I made the cuts on the digital editing system. You got to make the same cuts on the film material. The output of the editing system generally is nowadays is that the audio is also cut alongside in this digital realm. It's output into a sound negative recorder, which will make the optical track, which will get sent to the negative cutter. Then the negative cutter will sync up the track to the picture, which will be the element that will actually get used to make the release elements. And we go, let's see here. So let's kind of keep it on the acquisition side here. So now on the digital workflow. Digital workflow is that we can still have a film element as part of the mix. Video acquisition can be anything from a standard def camera, mini DV, HD camera, and actually it can be nowadays, it could actually be cameras that surpass HD resolution. And in fact, at NAB, which was a big trade show in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago, there's now a big push from the manufacturers to give sell cameras that are very small in size, in low cost, that have high resolution, sometimes even let's say resolution that is doubling of HD at a very economical cost, which is a lot of filmmakers and artists will jump on the latest technology because it's actually getting better. So that's on the video acquisition side. Computer-generated images can be into the mix. There's things that are animations. It can be titles and credits. It could be things that are effects-based. So then so again, with the difference here, so now to the analog film, if it's is part of the mix, it will get scanned or telecined, and sometimes that terminology gets used a little loosely, into the digital editing system, which is also synonymously called the digital intermediate. And one of the things that differentiates this system from this system is that this is a higher quality editing system. It's generally uncompressed. It has you're not working a low res. You're basically working on the best quality because you need to preserve everything from here while you're working here. Same decision making takes place. You're cutting the film. You're making all the decisions digitally. Different decisions. You're not making a cut list. You're making the final product, which will then get sent to a film recorder. And the film recorder, whether it's a two-piece film recorder, which records, one film recorder records the sound, one film recorder records the picture, or some of the newer film recorders that actually record picture and sound together. So back to the analog side of the equation. So once the negative and optical soundtrack are all sunk up, there's many choices that one can make. One choice is that, in fact, with Janice, with the film that I'll be talking about later, from the cut negative, we made a positive print directly. Janice's film, she'll talk about, is that from the cut negative, she made a interpositive. Actually, it's here, interpositive, as a protection element there, and then from there made an internegative, and then made positive prints. One thing also that gets added into the mix is, especially if you're working with 8mm material and you have to make a 16mm print, you would need to do an optical blow-up. Vice versa, if we say shot something on 35mm from a film recorder, and we need to make a 16mm print, you would do an optical reduction. So this is sort of like an optional choice depending upon what your deliverable is and what your acquisition is from. So the case study here is a project that came in the door a few months ago at DuArt, and it's by the artist Riccardo Valentine, and he needed to have two 16mm films created from this digital work that he supplied, and it's two 53-minute films that needed to be created. And so typically when films get created digitally today, that there are a lot of choices. And the idea for OneStop Shopping for, as I mentioned earlier, for DuArt was not a possibility. So what we had to do, and we had to coordinate, and I think this is going to be the future of filmmaking going forward, of 4 distinct companies, including ourselves, to team together that have different specialties of the workflow, and each of us took a piece of the workflow and stitched it all together to make the finished prints. And as the technology, as the companies start changing, that I think that this network of partners is what's going to be the survival of film going forward. So this is kind of the slideshow story of exactly how it started from start to finish, and it's sort of very typical how clients and artists and people kind of walk into DuArt. Client, Riccardo walks in DuArt, hard drive in hand, says, "Okay, here's my finished film. I need to have 16mm prints made from it." Okay, it's typical how it is. So the first thing we do is that, okay, let's just see, Riccardo, exactly what you have. And we looked at his project, which basically was a Final Cut Pro project, and had the 2 films on this Final Cut Pro project. And I'm looking at it, and I saw that it was created in standard definition. And seeing that the source material had so much quality, had so much resolution, it was composed in such vibrancy and elegance that it says, "Riccardo, this can't be. It has to be redone, and we have to re-edit this thing in HD because it really, the material deserved it." So we ended up Ricardo agreed, and we ended up starting the process of re-editing his, in essence, completed film. Oops, what happened here? Wrong way. Okay, actually it's not. So, I mentioned about the workflow. This is actually a little bit modified version of exactly the workflow that you have in your chart there, except it's a little bit different. His material started as computer-generated scans that were from a paper images that were scanned digitally. It's going to be edited digitally. It's going to have a recorded out to film and sound. From there, we will and then we'll have to. Then we're going to have this basically again. We'll have a cut sound negative. So we're going to have a sound negative and a regular negative that's going to have to be cut together by a negative cutter because there's a problem of limitation of stock size right now. One of the problems of the 53-minute film that the camera negative available to us is only available in 800-foot lengths. The soundtracks, optical soundtrack stock is available in 1,200-foot lengths. So to get a 53-minute film, it required two 1,200-foot optical tracks, and it required 3 picture negatives. So that required quite a bit of editing digitally, and it had to also require a lot of negative cutting. And so once the negative was cut, then we made a direct positive print from it, from the cut negative. So here is so we took Ricardo's drive and we ingested it into our Avid nitrous editing system. And David here is one of our senior editors at David Goth at DuArt. And if you'll see here, and this is basically what the art film is composed of, is these individual slides of ink blots. You can see in here. So they started off as still slide images that, and you really can see it very well here, but they have a resolution over twice of HD. So we knew the original stuff still had tremendous quality. So what we did is that on this system here, and so you have here is the preview of the edit here, and this is the timeline. So each one of these little squares here is an individual slide. And what had to be created digitally in this digital media editing system was they had a lot of motion effects, so that the images, one slide in essence zooms into the other slide. There's also dissolves that take place. There's a lot of effects that took place that had to be actually be re-edited from Ricardo's original work. And then here is the soundtrack below. Also, you'll notice here, this is an HD timeline. I mean, HD window. It's 16 by 9, and you see these little black bars on the left-hand side and right-hand side of the screen. And we actually had to compose the image as 4 by 3 in this 16 by 9 HD time space because 16 millimeter film is 4 by 3, and that's the desired release. So here are the 2 films. These are the 2 timelines of the film. This is one film here, and you can see how many slides there are. And this is the second film. It's basically 2 versions of inkblot that he created that are being shown. So what we did here, so basically after the films were edited, and we outputted to an HD master. And the HD master of choice du jour today is HDCAM SR. Is HDCAM SR. And this tape machine is the highest quality digital tape format that is in existence today. Steve Wilbur is our senior tape op at DuArt. So after the 2 films were output to the HDCAM SR master, then it had to now be re-ingested into a Final Cut editing system. This is a Final Cut here. And the reason is that, as I mentioned earlier, is that so they were edited as 2 53-minute programs. We had to break it up into reels. And in essence, as I said here, is that we had to, and you really can't see it too well in this system here, but each of these little tabs are the picture reels, and one of the two tabs here are for the sound reels. Because again, the stock limitation is that 800 foot and 1200 foot, we had to break up the program with overlaps so that the negative cutter had the ability to cut the negative together. So that's what was done in the Final Cut. And then the outputting from the Final Cut, we recorded on this system here, which is basically a modified Kinescope system. We've had this technology has been around certainly for at least 60 years or more, and we basically upgraded the system to HD, so that, as you can see here, is the monitor that is showing the ink blot. This is the camera. Is here. It's in essence photographing the image from the monitor. It's basically a special camera designed to do kinescope recordings back in the day. Eric Peel, you see here, is our head of our archivist department. He's our head archivist. There's myself. So we saw here in the previous thing. So here's that we're recording the picture onto the camera negative. Over here myself, I am preparing to record the optical track. The optical track actually, from the output of the editing system, we outputted the audio to this digital audio tape here in my hand. That, in essence, gets synchronized and sunk up, in essence, properly so that it gets recorded onto the optical camera here to make the optical track. Okay. So now, after we shot the picture negative, the first one of our partners is that we shipped the picture negative to Deluxe, New York. Phil Amiri is one of the managers there for Deluxe, New York. So, starting from the top left, so one of the things that they do, it's so when they receive the negative in, they inspect it. This is their negative processing machine there that processes the film. The chemicals that are used to process the film. It's a gorgeous lab. It was built, I think, 5 years ago with basically no expense spared. Probably one of the newest and nicest labs in the U.S. right now. So after it gets processed, then Phil is going to inspect the film to see if there's any issues from processing, which they don't have. Okay, so now after the film was processed at Deluxe, Deluxe shipped the film to Janice Allen in Cinema Austin, Pennsylvania. And actually, so in essence, she's received, this is Janice Allen here, and of course, Standard Gauge is actually, this is not the title that I'm going to be showing. Standard Gauge is the second film that Ricardo did with Janice. I did one and she did with the other. In addition, so she received the picture negative from Deluxe. She received the unprocessed sound negative from Duart, which we shot. And that's the sound negative here. And she has, behind her is her processing machine, which is basically a black and white spray processing machine, and actually does one of the best jobs for processing black and white film. It makes phenomenal soundtracks from it. So she's going to process the sound negative from Duart. Oops. Okay, so after both films are processed, and so Mike here is her negative cutter and timer. So what Mike is doing here is that he is cutting the picture negatives and the sound negatives together from the list that I provided him from the edit system. Once he's done that, he will put it onto a Hazeltine or a Filmmaster system that is here in Europe to time or grade the picture. So here is just a sample. I pulled it from our laboratory of basically what a timing sheet looks like from a Hazeltine, and it's basically, you can see it's broken down by footage, which is cues, and it's broken down by lights. And the lighting system, and I'm sure a lot of the other people will be talking about it, it's a range from 0 to 50. And when you say when they time a print, it's a very meticulous thing. The time a negative for a print. They only have 3 controls: red, green, blue, and an overall setting. And that's the only choice they have. But how they do that and how they is an extreme skill. So once they time it, they will generate this very high-tech digital medium called, which is a paper tape punch, which actually stores all the timing information from the Hazeltine. And that time information goes to the printing machine. Gets loaded into the printing machine. They will load in here the sound negative, the picture negative, and the raw stock. And as you can see, Mike is also his printer, Janice's printer too. And you'll see here, this one here is the picture printing head, and here's the sound printing head. This is called a panel printer VHP. Okay, now let's follow the film along again. So after the film has been printed, and it's now shipped to Movie Lab in Maryland. And this is Ernie, the Aschenbach, the owner of Movie Lab in Maryland, and he's actually one of the few people left on the East Coast that can process positive 16mm film. So this is his processing machine here for the 16mm film. In fact, the one thing you can see is that positive film processing is a very difficult operation because there is a lot more tanks, a lot more chemicals involved, and it's very difficult from experience. This is the take-up of the film, and one of the things this here we had him take a picture of is, especially on 16mm film, which is very critical, is that there's this thing called an applicator, and you will notice that where the soundtrack is, and Jeff had some good pictures of it on the slides that he had, that the soundtrack actually looks very bluish. It's very dark and bluish. And one of the processes, especially with 16mm and archival 35, is that it's a silver soundtrack. And this process here keeps the silver in the soundtrack, because otherwise, if you don't have silver in a soundtrack, it sounds like a horror. So if this thing is actually not proper, and sometimes you see it on bad prints, that you'll see this splashing of blue dots all over the picture, or basically the sound will be kind of wishy or muddy. It's a very critical operation, and it's only for 16 and again for archival 35. Then the film, after the film gets processed, got processed from Movie Lab, it now came back to DuArt. We test screened the print to make sure that the print was good. We put it on our cleaning machine there to clean off any of the dirt from handling of the print. Willie Robinson is our film maven, at DuArt, and he's actually loading up the film cores onto reels, which is then getting packed up and shipping to the museum in Porto, Portugal, which went on exhibition last week. So this is the poster for the movie, and actually I'd like to run the film. Let's take a look. That's actually the first time I've heard it myself in such a large space, and it's a wonderful piece. We can maybe have the house lights on, because I'd like to. I know Ricardo's actually in the audience, and maybe you could stand up and say hello and introduce you. So this is digital filmmaking today. Any questions? Maybe you can come up to the mic, or get a mic handed to you.
Hi, that was quite a process. What's the cost of going from those four?
Well, one thing about cost is There's many different ways of dealing with the workflow for something like this. And you saw we picked one type of workflow. In essence, we did an HD variation of a Kinescope. But we could have used other choices for it. And one of the choices that was being considered is that we could have shot it out on 35 millimeter on the area laser recorder and did an optical reduction to 16. That would have, in essence, doubled the cost. But the thing is with cost is that it's always a bit of a variable, and that's one of the reasons why, especially as a post house, film house, we always like, before even a project starts, you sit down with the artist or the filmmaker, and you discuss the workflow to try to keep that cost very tuned and minimized, because it's very easy, like an unexpected cost was to re-edit the film in HD that was originally edited in SD. So it is a variable, with cost, and it's kind of tough to answer.
I have a question about risk. And as conservators, one of the things we're concerned with is reducing risk. And with this sort of process, the number of hands and the amount of times it gets the material gets transported from one point to another and over some geographic distance, the risk seems to be higher and higher. And you didn't seem to mention how you mitigate that.
Well, and that is a problem, and that's one of the things that we had to consider going on a venture like this, basically of coordinating 4 vendors, including ourselves, because ultimately we were responsible for the entire project start to finish, and which was not mentioned here. There was issues, and there were problems that when we shot something out on a roll and then had it processed, and then before it was getting cut, we saw that there was issues with the camera negative. We had to reshoot it again and there is going to be issues, and but as long as you have somebody that takes responsibility for the entire project, that says, okay, we want to make sure that the end result is going to be the best thing possible. If there's a mistake, it ends up being done. And because we're creating the process, this is in essence, this is before it gets into a museum. And this is the final element that goes to the to the artist that delivers to the museum. We're creating the element. So any of the responsibility of creating it is from our side. So it shouldn't be any much of an issue relating to a museum perspective. Any other questions?
I have a question for Ricardo, and I think the question is why output to film, starting from a hard drive, why film, and what does that mean? Well, how can we interpret that? Can you help us interpret that?
Well, certainly I think Ricardo should answer that one.
The reason is because I really like the 60 millimeter film as a medium, and I've been all my previous works in 60 millimeter in photography. I've been using like 60 millimeter to produce photographies and films and film screenings, and so this is one of my main mediums that I've been working, and this was the reason that I decided to turn this digital high-definition version to 60 millimeter, because I really like the limitations of the medium to produce the effect that we have here with this kind of psychedelic film.
I can answer from my perspective. Being I saw the entire process from start to finish, when you looked at it in the digital world, in the HD world, it had a totally different meaning and feeling than when I saw it here. And if we would look at it that way, it would be a totally different work. And I think that one of the things and why I, enjoy working with 16 and trying to keep it going is that because it's so non-digital, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect medium. It has all these issues going on. That where the digital world is so perfect, it gets a different perspective. So when I saw it here and I'm seeing it blown up and seeing all the issues relating to it, it's a different feeling, and I think that's probably what Ricardo sees in a different way.
Yeah, maybe first you. Do we have a mic over there?
Hi, this is just a practical question. I'm an archivist, so we often get films decades after they were printed, and sometimes we get the original elements from the donors as well, who are often family members of the artists. The artists aren't around anymore. And sometimes we have timing sheets and punch tape and EDLs among the cans, and I always wonder, I always keep them, but I always wonder, would that be useful to a technician today if we sent the film to be reprinted?
Very, very valid question, and actually, I put there's a flyer. It's also included in your pack, and I think a lot of other people will be talking about it. Is how do you conserve the look of something like this that's being created? One of the ways that we did with this film, and I think other people do something similar because it's a newly created work, is that we included in a LAD. And that LAD is a referenced image that's supplied by Kodak that it's cut into the negative, and that LAD was printed normally on the print. So it's in essence as if the print changes, or if you have to, if any changes that happens to the print over time, it will happen to the LAD equally. And because it has a known set of reference imagery of densometric images, and the look is of the the China girl woman that's on it is a standardized look. You can track it over time. Now, what we did with, and it is a valid thing to have timing numbers. It's not necessarily always interchangeable between one lab and the other, especially like with DuArt, when our timing numbers didn't work with Deluxe or didn't work with Technicolor, because our, in essence, little secret sauce is a little bit different than everyone else's, but that's a guide. Certainly in the digital work here, we also we did things like we shot out color bars, because it started out as a digital work and it wound up film. Color bars is a standardized image, so that has a certain look. There is no one real answer. Film's a lot harder to deal with that way than video, but I think by putting a combination of all these different methodologies together with good notes and having maybe a digital image as the reference, because he has the HDCAM SR as one master. The combination of all these elements can paint the whole picture going forward.
So I was just going to add something to Maurice's comments. In our work at the UCLA Film and Television Archive, what year with those timing tapes are very useful. I would say that in our work they're not the definitive answer, but what we often do is something which we would call a conversion print, where we take the pre-existing timing tapes that would come in the can from the previous lab work that had been done and use them as a starting point to see what it's looking like. Often the film stocks have changed. As Maurice has pointed out, one lab's control system will not be identical to another, so even under the best of circumstances. And so I would say that they're not the final reference, but they're a very valuable tool, and by all means, always keep them. So.
Any other questions? Okay, so I mean, I will actually have some of the elements when we're on the workshop there during lunch. I'll actually have some of these film elements, the internet and the IPs, and some of the film things you can actually get a close-up look on if you're not familiar with the terminology. And I guess Joanna.